We are drowning in a world of egoic waste, a sea of endless opinions and trivialities. So much noise, all to say nothing, it seems, and yet we call it progress. We consider ourselves evolved, knowledgeable and fair. But man has forgot to listen. He instead favors his own song, instead of listening to the silent whispers of life, taking no hints, no prisoners. The beast is as ruthless as ever. Such a time we live. We take financial advice from beggars, follow the dreams of insomniacs, buying hopes from the hopeless and making love with the diseased. We wonder why society is crumbling. Identity matters not when one's appetites are apparent in today's world. We substitute personality now for what appetites and perversions have consumed the psyche. We reproduce it amongst our peers via memes and misguided morality, never stopping to wonder the validity, the sanity of it all. We have forgotten the power of saying no. We have forgotten the power of forgetting and of remembering. For too long have we bought into our own act, into our own grift. The consequences of such are immeasurable, incalculable. And so man has maimed himself. He believes in his heart of hearts that his systems are golden, his temples clean, and his laws fair and just. We are destined to be humbled in the end, destined to die and destined to repeat history ad nauseam. Yet man acts as though he shall live forever, and that his folly is somehow wise. Perhaps intuitively, we know we never die. Somewhere deep down we understand the nature of all things, of ourselves. The veil of conscious processes filtering the raw binary code that makes up all reality. Behind every wall, every cloud, every living being, something emanates from it, and in return from us. We dream of worlds we have never seen, feel things we have never felt. Sometimes we remember something we never had to forget. The endless coincidences, the endless déjà vu. Perhaps we are playing a game with ourselves, a game of amnesia. In the end, what fun would it be to know the outcome of a story? What fun is an easy game? We make the world worse just to fix it. We ruin our lives just to experience the emotional cocktail it engenders. So we pretend. Pretend we are not eternal souls in a temporary experience. Pretend that all these labels and rules are real. Or maybe we needed to forget, needed to be reminded of truth through silence. Because what significance would our actions or inaction hold if we knew why we incarnated here? Only when man is faced with the possibility of non-existence, eternity, and all things in between, that we learn the true nature of our souls. To do so, we must die. Or what we consider to be we must die. Every day, every moment is a little death. All the cells that make up your form have died and been replaced, and yet here you are. A being of light, a manifestation of an idea, a stable pattern of energy that is cursed to be undone. How tight we hold on to life, how tight we hold on to our persona, never stopping to look upon the stage and remember, because we are all too busy listening to the noise and trying to remember our lines. Such is why the ego fears silence, fears good news, and fears suffering. All of these are catalysts for understanding. The ego convinces you to avoid uncomfortable things, and yet it leads you into an uncomfortable life. It is obsessed with self-preservation, but it kills our soul's mission and the motivation for radical change in favor of comfort and routine. What a pity it is to believe in such a voice's commands, its beckoning and cries for attention. It should be regarded as nothing more than a pet. Show it love, allow it to be heard, but do not allow it to run without a leash. So many ideas are allowed to fester within us. We mistakenly believe these thoughts to be our true self and not merely a byproduct of the ego and its instrument, the mind. Because of this, we suffer. We ignore the fact that emotions create thoughts because such a realization would threaten the ego's hold on our primary functions. One fear thought can generate hundreds more. Trying to change one's thoughts alone is akin to plugging the holes in a hose when one only needs to turn off its source. Emotions produce all thoughts. While some may argue in favor of objective facts, I can argue that how we feel about something is all that really matters. It is of little benefit to me to know something if I cannot understand it within my soul, process it, and interpret it in the ways that matter to me and my external environment. You may tell me the fire is hot, but until I feel it myself and understand the pain deeply, the fact alone won't hold any significance. If life was as simple as knowing, we would all be millionaires and successful, having no need to learn for ourselves. History would not repeat itself, and we would have achieved some level of enlightenment. Yet here we are, wallowing in the filth, regressing into more of beasts than that of sentient beings. Emotions are a gauge for how we are living our life. They do not lie and they do not deceive. One may feign joy or sadness, but to feel it is another thing entirely. While living on emotions alone is not advisable, I recommend we start a relationship with our feelings and dissect further into the phenomena of feeling itself. What a thing it is to feel something. We label it and write it off as nothing more than a thing, taking its nature for granted. It is called feeling for a reason. We are reaching outside and within when we feel. When we love, we mix and mold with the person before us, sometimes forgetting where our form begins and ends. We can feel the power and weakness of rage within every muscle fiber, the heat coming off our skin and the energy within us swelling like an inferno. We can feel the weight and color of sadness. We can feel the numbness and sensitivity of lust, the clarity and bubbliness of joy and happiness. To be radical and truthful about those sensations as an individual focus and as a whole is a mystical process in and of itself. To peer beyond the labels and local experience of the sensation is an unfolding that supersedes definition by its very nature. When we do so, we kill the notion of what fear, joy, love, and so forth mean within the containment of ego. So do the memories of what those emotions meant to us in the past and the context that accompanied them. The future systems and complexes crumble as well, leaving us only with the present moment in all its splendor. The silence descends upon us, and our true reality is presented to us. Only then are we free to be reborn like a phoenix from the ashes of a lesser self. However, most people will never even be aware of such a process's significance and universality. We seize, we choke, and we falter in the face of such a task. Seeing the path is one thing, walking it is another. The comfort of the known is what kills the soul, and it is comfort and knowingness that is used against man with great effect by the hidden hand and chain that pulls society and mankind into darkness. It is the pursuit to not only have man entangled hopelessly in this web, but to also render him a slave to his own circumstances and to his own free will. I imagine it is justified in the minds of the elite, saving man from himself and creating self-fulfilling prophecies about man that justify the harsh correction and coercion they implement. It is akin to putting someone into a prison and wondering why they are not reformed when they return to society. Because it isn't about reformation, it is about return customers and the profit that comes with it. Just imagine the damage a handful of abundantly wealthy and morally bankrupt people can do to a society. Now imagine that money buying more power and then more and more power for hundreds and even thousands of years. Just imagine the roots and connections that have not only been solidified but further grown into nearly every industry, from entertainment, food, appliances, defense, and medicine. The weeds grow roots and suffocate all nutrients that are needed to flow into a healthy society. Yet in the mind of the parasitic elite, without their money and input, society would be derelict and fruitless. How ironic that they have pushed and seeded the division in the hearts of man and society, once again creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have convinced people snakes aren't poisonous and that the ivy makes for good tea. To a simpleton, the garden is luscious and teeming with wondrous foliage and ripe fruit. To the initiated, it is clear what is really taking place. These parasites imagine themselves above the rest of the swine that is man, as though they are better than the swine because they control and manipulate the swine. This is of a similar mind to the self-deprecating moral crusader who believes self-flogging will justify his real or unreal wrongdoings. Whether out of boredom or out of some belief system that extends to the supernatural, these parasites have made it a mission to enslave mankind, not only in body, but in soul as well. Imagine the kind of person it takes to rule and to rule absolutely. Imagine the tactics and morally bankrupt mind that engenders such a position and privilege. Their entire mindset and all bodies of learning they engage in are to maintain and gain more power. Whatever the cost, it matters not to them. As it is said, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. But how does such a small amount of people control a city, a town, a state, or a country, let alone control an entire planet? By simply understanding man's mind, his patterns and his motivations. Essentially, to understand man as the archetype he encapsulates. Just imagine how much energy goes into understanding how to control man's mind and his heart. It really isn't too hard. Hijack his basic biology and keep his mind obsessed with trivialities. Keep him lustful, keep him angry. The real effort goes into buying and adapting the tools to keep man docile and subservient. Even that is easier than ever before. Fast food, fast entertainment, fast pleasures all equal a fast and a cheap life. Man does not typically see this grooming taking place, and if and when he does, it is generally too late to save him from the stupor he is in. Even for those that are coldly sobered to the reality before them, they typically will not find the strength or significance to change their ways. Such a man is a slave among slaves. But we are all slaves. I mean that in the most metaphorical and literal sense. No amount of mental gymnastics or explanations can change my belief that taxation is a form of slavery. Give me this amount of money, or I will throw you in prison. If you resist my demands, I will send armed men to make you comply. If you resist them in any way, we will physically force you to comply. If you resist with force, we will take your life as well. We have no control where this money goes. Clearly, much doesn't go into roads or schools. One only needs to look outside to see the impoverished state of our streets and young minds. Even if the government demanded only a penny, it would nonetheless be a form of slavery. It is comical that much of this money is used to build infrastructure and research ways to further enslave us. Or it's spent greasing palms of legal drug dealers, funding terror and insurrections in other countries and so on. Or maybe it's all the fancy dinners and travel expenses they incur. It sure must be expensive to fly around and lecture the underclass about cutting back more for the sake of the environment. Or maybe my discontent is in their salaries as supposed public servants. One has to wonder how such a profession could make someone a millionaire, afford them multiple homes and luxury items. While they preach to us and wail about the horrors of gun violence and crime, they reside in gated communities and always have armed guards. They are filling your heads with nonsense, hiding behind virtuous deeds and righteous indignation, all while the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Left and right, it matters not. It is different sides of the same coin. The social struggle and conversation used to be a class war. Now it's a race war, a gender war, a poor man's war, such as all wars have been, started by the rich and fought by the poor. Man spends all this time trying to know things, but never how to treat his fellow man. He takes money that could be used to raise man's consciousness and instead invests it in his downfall. They could at least leave the layman alone, but their egoic God complex cannot allow such. It must be in the nature of such people to be comprised of the most vile and potent venom. I struggle to see the purpose of such people. Perhaps this too is something I must resign to unknowing. How could an individual limited by mind and body understand the workings of a system as complicated as incarnation? God only knows the reason for evil, but in a world of no accidents, I imagine its purpose is as grand as the purpose of good. The part that disturbs me, however, is the larger motivation and scope of their lesser work. To them, it is not enough to enslave man literally, but to enslave his mind and subsequently his soul. In doing so, they enslave the future generations to come and force man into the more traveled path of devolving instead of nudging him towards the higher truths and modalities that accompany man's potential. The elites cannot produce anything organic. They merely manage and control sources of inspiration and influence which are used as mouthpieces or dummies to put forward their perversions of truth and occult practices. The initiated and truly educated understand the cosmic laws that bind man to consequences and effect, an understanding which they use with great efficacy against a blind population. In doing so, they shield themselves from the consequences of their commands and intentions. How so, you might ask? Ask yourself this. Is the man who gives the order to pull the trigger, or the man who pulls it morally responsible for the outcome? While I understand life can be grey, the decision is not. The man who pulls the trigger bears the responsibility, as man always has the free will to say no. Those who say, "I am just doing my job," are nothing more than shepherd dogs for a master that keeps the company of cats. These dogs are the machinery that enables the tyranny we face today and in past times, corralling the herd of sheep into a metaphysical slaughterhouse of dense consciousness. While someone will always fill the role of shepherd and herder, as well as the sheep, the cycle cannot be broken with such an attitude and justification. Such a mindset is the Achilles tendon of man's potential as a species and as a spiritual being. These masters must convince people to think and act as they do to inspire populations to their coldness and rigidity. It is strange that all these supposed movements of love and tolerance tend to generate the opposite effect. It is the bread and butter of tyrants to create a problem and then provide the solution, gaslighting the population on an abhorrent scale. Some examples are the war on terror and the war on drugs. It is no different with the love and peace movements which supply acceptable love and acceptable hatred. When one's eyes are trained, you will see that inversion is a technique used with great efficiency against the blind. The significance of inversion is that it trains people to become accustomed to the unnatural and to accept illusion without question. The side effect of this inversion is the cultivation and propagation of mental illness. To clarify, illusions require perpetual tuning and repetition to remain effective. These illusions, or lies, are supported in one's mind via complex thought structures and beliefs. Downregulation of other internal systems, such as instinct, intuition, and common sense, are also required. The friction produced between man's inner knowledge and with what he has fed his mind will inevitably cause mental distress and subsequently mental illness. This is why propaganda is addictive. The person knows deep down that what they are believing and engaging in is erroneous, and yet intuitively they know if they ceased its consumption that they would suffer greatly for it. Much like a person who uses narcotics in a deleterious fashion, the body and rational mind know its long-term effects will be devastating. However, the immediate high is too sweet to give up. Thinking, knowingness, and even suffering are addictive to many people. Propaganda, in its many-faced presentations, is no different. Providing an outlet for our rage, entertainment for our egos, and a substitute or fuel for our guilt and indignation. A good way to phrase and study such a phenomenon is called belief perseverance. The path of least resistance is the preferred choice of energy in a closed system, and thus it is no wonder that our bodies crave the easiest forms of relief. Our mind and spiritual purpose are no different. Many people accept what they are told at face value, or they use stereotypes or social models to do the thinking for them. To be fair, the great battle today is not just a battle of truth, but of time and thus energy. So many people are too exhausted to think through much of what's presented to them, and so they take the road of thought that requires the least amount of thinking and effort. Such is another tactic of controlling bodies of power. Do you ever wonder why they put candy at the checkout line? Because by the time you have gotten to the cashier, your willpower and decision power is weakened via decision fatigue. Do you not think this small and common example is not exploited on a larger and more effective scale? It is interesting to me that too much choice and time can result in bondage as well. Many people who have transcended the basic animal needs to survive, alongside having an excess of energy which has no real meaningful and positive direction to flow into, find themselves susceptible to propaganda just as much as the exhausted and impoverished, if not more. The guilt of a full stomach is sometimes more painful than the pangs of an empty one. Those who wade in the muck of creature comforts are no different than those who seek its allure in terms of direction. Both are seeking an easier path, an easier life, never a harder one. The man with more dollars than sense cannot see the error in his approach to life, love, and health. He spends his whole life working himself sick just to have the money to pay for his health later. He neglects the love of family for the easier company of easier woman. He spends his life never thinking about why he needs more of the same when he has met his needs long ago. Whether man be in chains or tweed, his mind is geared towards the lesser, while his soul beckons for the greater. He drives himself into these programs and illusions out of a laziness of sorts. The real difference between the two is one lives in guilt and another in pity. However, these feelings are really no different when one examines them closely. The rich and detached buy into social and supposed moral models of being that they believe will serve as acts of contrition for their lifestyle and privileges. The poor man supports these very same systems in the hopes they may elevate him to a higher standard of living. Yet both paths are the path of least resistance, and both seek moral justification. The failure of these individuals lies not in so much the movement itself, but the lack of internal regulation and study, as well as the lack of logical foundation for their beliefs. One must be open to all sides and arguments, and not fear questions or resistance to their ideas, if they are truly on a moral path, a path of truth. This, of course, is inconvenient to the ego and man's addiction to knowingness. He is less interested in learning and more so in knowing, in being right. Being open of mind about such topics would also eliminate the payoff of buying into widely accepted social models and movements. Not only do they get to feign being underdogs and defiant, but they receive the carte blanche to belittle and undermine any opposition to the ever-changing list of enemies the state deems necessary. I always wondered why some people never defied authority figures or laws, despite them being illogical and intrinsically wrong. This is because many people grow up following the rules, the systems, and the laws that are ingrained in our system, and they were rewarded for it. When someone grows up following the rules imposed by authority figures for their entire development, they are very unlikely to question the system they find themselves in when they grow into adulthood. Just telling a basic truth can activate emotional and mental programs in these individuals. Whether it be facts about biology, holes in scientific and or religious doctrine, even common knowledge, the person afflicted will almost always lash out or mindlessly respond. The person has shifted from a faith in self and of a higher power to a faith in social science and man's laws. The effort to reduce all things into a mechanical explanation and process is a process in and of itself, which either lacks or omits the need for conceptual thinking and intuition. A person with such a mind can explain how a car works, but not why the car was built. The person might understand parts of the universe, but not why it exists. They assume that all things are accidental, meaningless, and ultimately pointless. It is no wonder that when organized religion lost its appeal to a changing generation, that the New Age movement and the movement of nihilism, as well as atheism, gained traction in mainstream culture. Not only are there countless flaws in these belief systems, but they thrive on taking a fraction of the truth and bending them into the shapes needed to unlock people's hearts and minds. Since these beliefs contain elements of truth and refined philosophy, they are sought after by those with appetites for truth and gnosis, like a moth to a flame. Little do they know the goal of such beliefs are not merely the acquisition of funding and influence, but the damnation of man's soul. I speak of soul not as in fire and hell or heaven and reward, but as in the essence that animates and gives life to the inanimate. This is another frustration when talking to those who have a faith in nothing. They hear the word God, and their programming kicks in with a model of what God is. So it is no wonder we get nowhere in conversation when we argue with logic or abstract concepts, because so much energy and propaganda has been directed into tainting and altering the meaning of language and symbols. Now even words as simple as male and female, God and science, right and left, can bring about instantaneous associations that have been seeded into one's mind, which were not discovered genuinely and truthfully. No better example of this is the word God, which has been targeted fervently by the new cult and faith of modern science. In the West, when someone hears the word God, their mind typically thinks of the Abrahamic telling of God, and thus their entire argument and understanding of God is based around this model. However, some other model underlies the need for God to be non-existent, typically a fear of God. Any rational person at some point has stopped and looked at the world, the nature of existence itself, and asked why. Why do we suffer? Why is there so much injustice and ignorance? Either man will seek to understand himself and the world more deeply, or he will accept a model out of ignorance. In the case of the atheist, the model that underscores and upholds their view of a godless universe is one that believes if God does exist, then he must be evil. Instead of looking at life, scripture, and people in more abstract ways, one feels a need to control his reality through reduction and compartmentalizing. He fervently needs God to not exist, because the model of God and the world he has unconsciously accepted is a harrowing one. When the rug is pulled beneath such people in reference to their model of God, you see the true arrogance of such a faith put forth. They will begin their regular regurgitation of swill, and yet, when presented with a concept of God that works outside their limited model, they will usually revert into agnosticism as to not seem foolish. I bring up the cult of atheism specifically because it is centered around knowledge, and thus, the curse of knowingness. I speak no ill will of agnostics, because their approach is one of a true scientific and spiritual mind, to be open to new information and experiences. What is both interesting and frustrating about the atheist is not his disbelief in God, but his hypocrisy. Not only does he operate on faith, but he feigns that his true worship is in objective reality, yet he ignores anything that goes in the face of his assumptions. He forgets science is an ever-evolving and ever-changing practice that isn't afraid to be questioned or examined. An atheist believes in things he cannot see, like gravity and magnetism, because he can measure and record its effects in quantifiable and verifiable ways, yet suggest to the atheist that there are things he may not be able to see or measure yet, and he will dismiss your ideas as foolish. Isn't the point of science to push the limits of man's understanding? Many great minds before us were mocked for their ideas, and many great minds had to pull truth and educated hypothesis from nearly thin air. They had to use intuition, abstract tools and questions to achieve a concrete and observable science, sometimes based on very little to no prior evidence beforehand. Is it hard to believe that our modern approach to understanding life, consciousness, and God are lacking? Are we silly to believe such a complicated world with amazing sophistication and structure could extend beyond the material? Even the reductionistic view of life, such as Darwinism, believes in a purpose for things. Yet that purpose ceases to be at a critical point. The problem isn't that it cannot explain it, but how atheists create explanations for it. Everything we label and experience is all from the framework and understanding of mind. But what lies outside the mind? What lies beyond what we call the human experience? How can a species that hasn't even mastered harnessing the energy from its own sun, space travel, or global supply chain management claim it knows of God's non-existence. We barely understand the surface implications of quantum mechanics, of deep space, or even our own oceans. Academia, religion, government, medicine, and many other large institutions have been infiltrated by groups that hoard knowledge for themselves, yet water it down for the masses. The alteration of history, language, and sociology are used as corrective channels for these parasites. They want a word to mean one thing, similar to how they want all people to be one thing, as this makes control much easier. Yet God, like many other words used to describe something wondrous and eldritch, are merely placeholders for the indescribable. A painting of God, for example, is not the true representation of God, but an aspect of God, a human representation. Humans are the one that place qualities and prerequisites on God. Who said God was good, that he was bad, that he was this or he was that? A book may say God is good or bad, but even a book that many believe is the Word of God is subject to translation and even interpretation as time progresses. What words we use then may mean something different now. God, from my limited interpretation, is the greatest force, the monad, the indescribable and yet most abundant truth present at all times. Science, evolution, and entropy do not disprove God. If anything, they enhance our understanding of God's magnificence. Despite me not agreeing with macroevolution, as it is rife with contradictions and bias, I nonetheless find evolution itself a truth of existence. Not only microevolution in nature, but the macro and microevolution of our minds and hearts. We can take abstract and apply it to the linear, and we can take the linear and apply it to the abstract. All things in life find harmony when we view it through a lens of spiritual evolution. I believe the day man truly reaches heights once thought impossible is when he blends the practice of both science and spirituality together. It is not so much knowing that presents the problem, but the attitude of knowingness itself. Sometimes in life we must know things to survive. There are times when we know something is wrong because it is infringing on another sentient being's personal sovereignty. Yet there are also times, be it in the face of horror, absurdity, or even deep love, that we must forget our persona and be what we are, forever present and non-holding. There are times to be receptive, and there are times to be a penetrating force. The real message I wish to convey here is not my opinion on the cultivation of knowledge, but of the importance of attitude and of mindset. At the end of the day, when man is stripped of all liberties and identities, the only thing he will have left is his attitude. As I mentioned previously, words tend to bring up a myriad of emotions and associations. The word attitude is no different. Many people associate the word with a negative or corrective connotation. But attitude extends beyond just our body language or tone of voice. It is a mindset and a way of being in the world. Weak people cannot possibly possess a good attitude, nor can a man with good company carry a bad one with him. You will be pressed to find anyone who cares for a bad attitude. Such people are seen as negative forces in their life, energy vampires and a drag to interact with. They act as though nobody else has experienced the same injustices they have. They assume that even if they have experienced similar complaints, that theirs are more justified. They act as though they know this behavior will grant them something, or that it will take away some joy from others. Compare that to the person who carries within themselves an air of gratitude, strength, and purpose. They exude a positive energy. Positive and negative, such words should be pondered. One attracts and one repels. Words are expressions of concepts and patterns in a simplified way. Much the same way attitude expresses a pattern of moral erectness and inner strength, or lack thereof. When life bears down upon us, taking away our health, our loves, and our futures, all we have left is how we respond to it. Our attitude. It is easy to have an attitude that is positive when life is positive. But to have an attitude that centers around not fake optimism, but guarded optimism when times are hard is what builds character. To see the lesson in all things is to learn, is to grow. When we are willing to surrender the illusion of knowingness about the things that may or may not happen to us, we begin to allow ourselves to see with our mind's eye. We can never lose when we adopt such a mindset. Even if our bodies are damaged, our minds tortured, and our hearts broken, we can take the pain, misfortune, and suffering and surely find a way to mold it into something useful, be it for ourselves or for others. This way, we may never lose. We only win. This is not faking it to make it, but it is a skill, a sixth sense we cultivate through years of being open to learning as well as failing. Even if we are fated to be misunderstood till our deaths, to be never fully satisfied in life, we choose to be better than yesterday anyways. Even though we know pain, death, and embarrassment are waiting for us, we welcome it willingly. Even though we may never have our dreams realized, even though we may die alone, we share love and comfort with others. If we had a guarantee of reward, if we knew why we were here and what would happen to us, then our lives and actions would hold no significance. What is more noble than to smile and evolve in the face of a force as grand and awe-inspiring as the universe? How empowering is it to be hardened and strengthened by adversity, overcoming it and growing alongside it? What a blessing it is to feel pain. And yet we keep running from life's greatest gifts and instead seek to toss them aside. Inevitably, we will attempt to fill the gap left behind with knowledge, pleasure, and calculated despair, as though it will do anything except solidify our discontent with life. How predictable it is to live this way, how boring. If people truly wanted to be different, they would look at the direction everyone else is going and go the opposite way, because you cannot be a whole person without the negative as well. To truly be the things we long for, we must sacrifice on some level for it. No matter how much you train yourself to run, the great work will always be waiting for you. I hope my words cut into your minds and prompt a wound that bleeds you of your stale blood. Be content with being unknown and forgotten. Be a fool. Be a bastard in a world that abandoned you. Be proud of it all. Put your soul and heart on the grindstone of life and wear yourself down until there is nothing left. Only then will you see the magnificence of your own weakness, and thus your own potential. Only when we have lost everything can we begin to know anything.